they spent most of their time looking for evidence to prove their case. They looked for evidence to prove he was guilty. They were trying to remember back to conversations and find the conversations so that they could say, he says right here. But all in all, it still came down to just his opinion, his thoughts, and his beliefs. What we had discussed had settled in on some people. They apparently had thought about what they had heard from the other jurors. And we were suddenly seeing 8 not guilties and 2 guilties. And slowly but surely, even they started to turn around until we finally got a consensus of not guilties on most of the verdicts. In the final days of the deliberations, really in the last 2, we were starting to come up with a lot of problems. We had found Sami Al-Arian not guilty on several of the verdicts, and we were hung on some of the verdicts. We had cleared the other 2 people of all their charges. And when we started to focus in on Fariz, one of the jurors had said that she didn't have any concerns because she could connect Fariz to some of the charges. So when we actually started to discuss them, I started realizing that it was just the same stuff that we had been going over, that it was just a lot of opinions, a lot of emotionalism, and that there really wasn't any evidence, even coming from the other jurors. I had counted on them when I had heard that, thinking, well, they did hear things that I didn't hear. They will be able to tell me. And I was looking at this from a different perspective at that point. I was kind of looking at it as we might, if they have information that I don't know about. But when we sat down and actually discussed it, it was more of the same old, same old. It was emotionalism and a lot of circumstantial evidence. When we were discussing Fariz in particular and the money laundering, there was no evidence of any money laundering. There was evidence that money would go from an account to an account, that it would go to charities over in the Middle East. But there was no evidence of any kind of money laundering. There was no evidence that it was supporting terrorism. So when we took the first vote, it was 8 not guilty, 10 not guilty, and 2 guilty. So I turned to one of the jurors that was voting guilty, and I said, I just want to know why you're voting guilty. What information do you have? What do you see in all this information that we have that the rest of us don't see? And her reason for voting him guilty was that he kept bad records. I didn't think that was very important. These were scholastic men. They weren't businessmen. They were educators. And they saw themselves being alone, voting against 10 other people. I think they kind of realized that it wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to get any guilty verdicts. So they just started voting guilty on everything to hang us on as many charges as we could, except ones that they had absolutely no evidence. They couldn't even themselves come up with anything. And I think that they just had gotten stubborn and dug their heels in and thought, I think that they thought in their hearts he was guilty of something. There was no evidence, but he was guilty. And they didn't want to let him go. I think the two people that were voting guilty kind of realized that they were between a rock and a hard place. I think that they thought that they could just say, I don't have to explain myself, because they did on a lot of guilty verdicts. We would say, why are you saying guilty? And they would just say, I don't have to explain it to you. And that was okay in the beginning because we knew we had lots of time. We could go back, we could discuss it. But as it started getting into the 10th day and the 11th day and the 12th day, and we were still hearing, I don't have to tell you, it was getting frustrating. We finally said, you kind of do. You do have, that's what we're supposed to do. I mean, it's not illegal to not tell us, but that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to discuss our ideas. We're supposed to try and convince each other. You can't convince us of your guilty verdict if you don't discuss it with us. But I think she kind of realized that there was no evidence. She couldn't say not guilty. She couldn't explain her guilty verdict. It was just easier to say not guilty. So we had originally asked the judge, we had told the judge the day before that we were having problems, that we were stuck. We were a hung jury on a lot of these charges. So he called us out to the courtroom and he said, you need to discuss it with each other. Those of you that are in the minority need to open up, listen to the people that are in the majority. You don't have to change your vote. I'm not asking you to, I'm not telling you to. I'm just saying be a little bit more open. Maybe you're not hearing everything they say. So I think to the two jurors that were hanging on to the not guilty verdicts, I think that was the end of their safety net. I think they were kind of hoping that they could just keep on saying, I don't have to explain myself to you, ride that to the end, go to the judge, say we're hung. He would say, okay, we'll just take what verdicts you have, and we could all go home. When the judge said, you need to discuss it, you need to talk to each other, you need to open up and listen to what each other is saying, that was the end of their safety net. That was the end of what they could do. They were now in a room with 10 people that were saying, why are you saying guilty? And they weren't able to say, I don't have to tell you. The judge had just told them, you need to discuss it. So I think they felt trapped. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't say not guilty. They couldn't say not guilty. They couldn't explain their guilty verdicts. They just did what they thought they had to do, and that was write a note and ask to end everything and to just accept the verdicts that we had and just go from there. You know, prejudice doesn't need a reason. It just is. People don't have to reason it out. They rarely do. I would have preferred the judge bring us into the jury box individually and ask us if we wanted to continue, if we wanted to stay on the jury. And if we wanted to stay on the jury, allow us to stay, and for those who wanted to leave, excuse them. We had 2 alternates in the building, and we had 4 alternates that were in the trial the whole time. They had listened to every word that I had heard, and they were still under the oath, they still couldn't discuss the case. That's what they were there for. They were alternates in case we had a problem, in case jurors couldn't finish. I would have preferred him to ask us individually if we wanted to stay on it, and if people wanted to leave, we could afford to lose up to 6 people. And I would have preferred him to bring the 6 alternates in, or up to the 6 alternates, however many wanted to leave. If the 2 women that were voting guilty wanted to leave, replace them. If they want to stay, then stay, but come to verdicts and explain our verdicts. If we were going to say guilty, be able to reason out a guilty and to tell us why there was a guilty. But that's what I would have preferred him to do. I wanted to know, if they were saying guilty and I was saying not guilty, there had to be a reason. They had to hear something, know something, or see something that I didn't see, hear or know, or that I wasn't viewing the same way, and I wanted that information so that I could make a fair judgment. But at no point did we, at any time, ever ask her to change her vote. Just merely to please explain why. That was the only thing we'd ever asked her to do. I would still like an answer to that question. Yeah. And you know, she was not alone. You know, she wasn't alone. There were 2 people. She had one person with her. But that really did bother me, because I thought we never did that. It made it sound like we were in there just abusing this poor woman. You know, we just asked her, why are you voting guilty? What do you have? What information do you have? Why are you basing it on? They never could tell us. We only got answers that were either, I don't have to tell you, which was the most common, or if they did come up with a reason, it had nothing to do with the charge, nothing at all. You know?